Welcome once again. Of course, this is Bottomline Africa, just in case you've just joined us. Now, as the humanitarian crisis in southern Somalia threatens millions of lives, Somalia's little-known northern neighbor, Somaliland, is doing so well that its government recently offered to send aid across the border. That a small and relatively poor country that is also suffering from the ongoing drought will be in a position to help Somalia is itself remarkable. That Somaliland achieved this position without being officially recognized by the international community as a sovereign nation, and thus without being eligible for international assistance, is truly impressive. That was a report that was highlighted on the Guardian paper. And now we go straight to a studio discussion tonight. Let me reintroduce our guest once again. We have Yasin Juma, a journalist who has a wide experience when it comes to matters Somalia. Abdul Wahab Sheikh Abdul Samad, regional affairs analyst, as well as Richard Tuta, who is a security analyst. Is going to dwell much more on the security of both Somalia and Somaliland. And last but not the least, we have Sultan Mustafa, who is going to join me shortly from Somaliland. That is where that, yet to be fully recognized country has held its election. Now, let me begin with you, Abdul Wahab. Good evening. You've seen that report from the Guardian newspaper. They're saying that what Somaliland has done is impressive so far. They've had some sort of an iris kind of recognition when it comes to their election. So the question is, why has it taken the international community so long to recognize Somaliland up until now?
And let's go back the historical perspective of the matter. Somaliland was British protectorate before it emerged with Somalia and Italian Somaliland, the 1st of July 1960, and formed Unified Somali Republic. Somaliland is more homogeneous than the rest of Somalia. The greater homogeneity tends to mean that there's a high level of trust between the people of Somaliland. That's why they support the process. Somaliland, although they don't get the recognition from international community, but there's a strong social contract between the government and the people of Somaliland. That's why Somaliland is a more stable and more peaceful and more transparent compared to the rest of Africa today. In addition to that, Somaliland if you look at the Somali political system, it contains, it's a mixture of the traditional element and the modern political structure.
Yes.
That's also, it has a grassroots level of what we call reconciliation process, which can easily, unite the people of Somaliland.
Yes.
The people of Somaliland is a homogeneous. Why I'm saying homogeneous, 80% of the population are subclasses of Somali communities. That's why, to maintain and contain, and also, the level of trust between the community are so high. In addition to that, if you look at this election right now, it's different from other elections for 3 reasons. The first one, they put in place what you call voter registration, unlike other elections. Secondly, the incompetent president, Mr. Silanyo, is not standing up at all. The other issue is there is an iris-based biometric system, which surely it's new to the African today, because when you place your finger of the biometric, it's also recognized both your fingers and also your eyes.
Yes.
So that Somaliland they can hold what you call they can host a peaceful, a credible, and also a decent election.
Yes.
What I mean, decent
and
election.
it's important to mention that is the first of its kind in Africa. So right now at this hour, more than 60 observers from the various European countries have been sent to Somaliland. Apparently that technology you're talking about have been funded by certain countries in Europe. So the failure by the international, do you think first of all the international community is in some sort of a self-denial because they're the ones who are sending these observers, and at the same time they're the ones who failed to recognize Somaliland?
Let me highlight your mind, Mr. Yusuf. South Sudan succeeded from the rest of Sudan just maybe 5 years ago. And today, they're not better than before. In addition to that, if today Somaliland is organized by international community, then it can open another Pandora box. For instance, the clans within the Somaliland, some of them are unionists rather than the separatists. So that some of them they are publicly supporting the unification of Somalia, but the majority dominant clan are opposing what you call to be too successful from the rest of Somalia. For instance, if you look at the campaign, the campaign of the three political parties. For instance, the ruling party, Kulmiya, the public, the guy who is eyeing for the top seat, Musabihi, is a hardliner. He publicly said, if I win the election, then I'm not negotiating with Somalia unless I engage the international community for mediation, not for facilitation. That's a high. In addition to that, if you look at the neighboring states, let's analyze one by one. Djibouti, for instance, since the Gulf crisis are impacted, that have affected the stability of the entire region, and the United Arab Emirates also, they have military facilities in the city, the city of Berbera. That also will affect the relationship between Djibouti and Somaliland, because the Djiboutians, they don't want to see, the United Arab Emirates have what they call a free port, just next to them, because it may pose economic challenge for the future. For instance, if you look at the relationship between Somalia and Somaliland, up to now, apart from what you call the Justice and Welfare Party leader, engineer Warabe, which publicly said that I'm going to engage the Somali political elite, political class, so that the stability and the peaceful Somalia, we can easily negotiate with them. Either we can seek for the peaceful divorce, or we can reunite again with conditions.
Clearly there are a lot of dynamics. Let me now allow me to engage Yasin Juma, who's a journalist and has covered both Somaliland and Somalia. Now, Yasin, good evening, good to see you. And, there are a lot of confusion. People tend to confuse Somaliland with the larger Somalia. How different are they? Because, when you talk about Somalia, Mogadishu, it's almost synonymous with, the attacks we've seen. How is Somaliland different? I'm sure you've visited there as well.
Well, I've been honored at least to visit both Somalia and Somaliland, and much honored that I had the opportunity to visit first Somalia, which was an Italian colony before 1960, then later on Somaliland, which was British protectorate before the 1960s, or before it got independence. So I got a chance of getting a first experience of what Somalia is, which is in the south, and a comparison of what Somaliland is. But maybe we could go back to semantics. Semantics is such an issue when it comes to matters of discussion on Somaliland. We just had we just saw a clip of the former First Lady, Dr. Edna, almost becoming a firebrand, saying that saying that Somaliland should be recognized as a republic. She used the word republic. So it's quite important that even in our discussion we use the correct words when referring to Somaliland. So the semantic question is, what is Somaliland? As a journalist, I find myself, a bit challenged when I'm doing a story about Somaliland. How do I refer this land, Somaliland? It also depends to who my readers might be. So
yes, definitely, yes, and that is a challenge. That is a challenge most journalists have.
Yes.
Yes, of course, that is a challenge most journalists have, because if you end up saying it's a semi-autonomous region, the people there who refer to them as Somalilanders tend to take it offensive, and if you refer to them as a republic, then it's something that it's not there yet. So where does that leave when it comes to reporting in Somaliland? Where will that leave journalists?
So, in other words, we find that some international news agencies have adopted a certain name given to Somaliland when they're dealing with matters, or they're doing stories about Somaliland.
Yes.
For example, I think BBC would say breakaway region of Somaliland, which still you heard from Dr. Edna. She's still she still isn't happy at all. Somaliland being referred to us as a breakaway region or breakaway state. Then I think earlier I heard you saying it's a semi-autonomous region.
Yes.
Because when you refer to Somaliland as a semi-autonomous region, what actually comes to somebody who has expertise on or has covered Somalia for quite a long time, like me, is what comes to my picture is Puntland, Jubaland, and maybe Hirshabelle and Galmudug. Those are what I'd refer to as semi-autonomous. I'd rather go to usually in my reports I refer to Somaliland as the breakaway region of Somaliland. And that tends to be a bit average and fair to both the Somalilanders, who are very sensitive when it comes to how you refer to them, because they are actually in a process of demanding international recognition. Yes.
Well said, Yasin. Richard, before I come to you and we discuss, details about security there and everything, Abdulhab, let me just pause this tweet we got from our viewer here, Jeff Nando, who says, there is a common agreement internationally that they will have to get consent from Mogadishu first. Is that the case first? Should Mogadishu be consulted when it comes to Somaliland's independence?
If they're going even to seek what they call independent state, they must seek what they call peaceful divorce rather than forceful divorce. That's what I'm saying. If, for instance, Somalia became a stable state, politically, economically, and socially, they can easily sit with them and revive what they call renegotiation of 1960. So either they can renegotiate with what you call certain conditions, or they can easily seek peaceful divorce. But the problem most of the Somalis are blaming for Somaliland is they are not engaging fully in Somalia, because there are some expertise and Somali observers are publicly, saying that the Somaliland is undermining the stability and what they call the peaceful of Somalia itself. So as long as that mindset exists, so the level of trust between the two nations, between the two, between the two, north and south, it's far from over.
Yes, clearly it's far from over, Abdulhab, and you've already mentioned several options there that Somaliland should pursue. Now, Richard, finally, let me come to you. And the AU, of course, that is their mission in Somalia, AMISOM. They've already indicated that they're going to reduce their troops in the larger Somalia by 1,000 individuals. That is by the end of December this year. It seems AMISOM is slowly withdrawing from the larger Somalia. So what does that mean for Kenya's security? First, because we are neighboring Somalia, and at the same time, Somaliland, which has enjoyed peace, quite a peaceful environment since 1991.
Yusuf, one thing that we need to realize is that all that happens in Somalia at the end of the day will not only affect the national security of Kenya alone, but you realize that it will affect both the security of the Eastern African countries.
Yes.
And not just the Eastern African countries alone. Again, it will also affect the security of Africa as a whole. It may also trickle and affect the security of the international community. Now, something else that we need to realize is that AMISOM they have not indicated their intention of withdrawing fully from Somalia. What they have said is that they are trimming down the number of their forces in Somalia, maybe by around 4 to 5% before the end of December. And as we are talking currently, you realize that AMISOM has got almost 22,000 troops in Somalia. So when we talk of that, they want to trim it by almost 5%. That one tells you that we may end up having 15 or thereabout troops in Somalia. But we need to ask ourselves, if at all the 22 has never been enough, will 15 be enough? And the other question that we need to ask ourselves, are they withdrawing because they have fulfilled their objective, or they are withdrawing because of other factors, like, for instance, financial constraint? And if it is a financial constraint, then you may realize that at the end of it all, withdraw or trimming down the number of forces at this time might serve to be counterproductive. Remember, just some 3 weeks ago, there was a major attack in Somalia. And that one was an indicator that as we are talking now,
so this is a critical moment that these armed forces are required in Somalia. I'm going to engage with you more, Richard. Let me now cross over to Hargeisa, that is Somaliland, where they conducted their election today. And on phone we have Sultan Mustafa Osman. Sultan, good evening. If you could hear me, how did the citizens there conduct the election today, and perhaps what are their expectations? Mustafa, can you hear me? Well, it seems I'm going to engage with him shortly. Now, Yasin, let me just come back to you once again. This is a country that is relatively poor. They've faced, successive droughts, and they've went ahead and come up with this kind of unique technology, the first in Africa, as far as the election is concerned. Do you think this is a step in the right direction for the, are they giving some sort of an example to the rest of the continent?
Yeah, it is, and they're taking these elections seriously. Mm-hmm. And the application of the iris scanning biometric in election just goes to prove that Somaliland is serious to show the international community that the elections are going to be free and fair. These are just the stages that they need to prove as they wait. They remain hopeful that maybe one day the international community might
will recognize
be able
them.
to
Yes.
recognize. So that's why they spend all that money to do this. Maybe, Ibrahim, maybe if I could go back to a question you just asked before to one of the panelists. We seem to have this negative picture concerning the relation between Mogadishu and Hargeisa, which sometimes I think most people don't understand that behind all this, the relation isn't that tense at all. If you ask Mogadishu, like today, what exactly would you want to see in the relationship between Somaliland and Somalia? They would say, as long as the whole of the country, that is Somalia, including the regions in Somaliland, are ready for a referendum and the people decide, then it's up to the citizens of Somalia to decide. So there isn't that much, frosty relation that people really get to see outside there. Another
I think yes, that should be largely blamed on those on social media. Let me now engage Mustafa, because I'm told he's now online. Now, Mustafa, Sultan Mustafa Osman is joining me all the way from Hargeisa, Somaliland. Sultan, good evening. I believe you can hear me now. What is the expectation of the people of Somaliland from today's election?
Good evening, Mr. Yusuf. The elections were held in a very peaceful and credible manner, and it ran the operation was quite smooth. And the polling station just closed about a couple of hours ago. And truthfully speaking, from the side of Somalilanders, they have been very, very good mood. I mean, the elections and the preceding campaign were held in a very celebratory kind of manner. And people are hopeful that what is remaining is the counting of the ballots and the announcement of the winner is going to follow the same pattern. And Somalilanders are quite, excitable of this election. And you've got a lot of young people who participated heavily in this election.
And we all know that election in Africa, in most African countries, are normally emotive. How was the election today in Hargeisa? Would you rate it as being largely peaceful? How was it? How was the experience for you?
It was largely peaceful and totally, I can even say totally easy. And
unfortunately, we couldn't finish that discussion with Mustafa. He was talking to me all the way from Hargeisa, Somaliland. Now, Abdi Wahab, let me just pose this question to you. This is a question so many people have been asking. How have, Somaliland managed to remain peaceful for all those years since 1991? and, you know, basically having a neighboring country that has been, you know, violent for all this time.
You know, Yusuf, Somaliland, they initiated what they call grassroots level of the reconciliation process, unlike the rest of Somalia. For example, in 1991, all the what they call the elders, they sit together in town of Bro to declare what they call independent state of Somaliland. Again, in 1993, they gathered together in Boroma, and then they initiate what they call grassroots level of what they call peace building. That's why, if you look at the system of the Somaliland today, it's a mixture of the traditional element and the modern, political structure, whereby the parliamentarians are what they call people who are normally, the Western, kind of Western kind of governance system of the Western kind of governance. They also upper house dominated by what they call the elders, the clan elders. That's why, they have, mechanism whereby they're going to negotiate and renegotiate and also build a peace from the grassroots level. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a homogeneous society. It's dominated by the one sub-clan. That's why they can easily understand each other. They can trust each other so that, they don't have what they call the manipulation from outside the country, unlike the southern part of Somalia, whereby any peace process is being manipulated by the international community, the European states, Arab states. You mentioned it. But unlike, Somaliland, there is no interference at all. People, they come together, they discuss openly, they discuss their differences, they resolve their own problems. They build what they call the structure of the government from the scratch. Today, you cannot compare the rest of Somalia in terms of the peace, in terms of stability, in terms of development, in terms of communication. Even it's better than Africa, much Africa. Somalis, what we are lacking for, they're lacking for the last 27 years is what they call the Somali initiative peace process, which they can conduct inside the Somalia. Most of the peace process is outside Somalia, either maybe the neighboring states, maybe the Arab states, maybe maybe the European capitalists. But if they initiate a grassroots level, clan to clan, they can easily overcome all those problems for the last 27 years. But unfortunately, the southern part of Somalia has been manipulated by what they call, it became free for all. Somalia, the southern part of Somalia became the theater of war, whereby every, even, for example, for the last, the Arabian crisis today, the Saudi-led, alliances against what they call the Qatar, they easily impact what they call the stability of southern Somalia.
Yes, clearly, there are also outside forces, as you already said, that is affecting the peace in Somalia. Now, Richard, hypothetically speaking, let's say Somaliland is fully recognized by the international community, it becomes a functional state. How will that bolster the security in the Horn of Africa region?
I think a time has come now for the international community to ask itself, which among the two is a lesser evil, between maintaining the status quo as it is currently or recognizing Somaliland as a state, which is a lesser evil when it comes to the regional security. And I think recognizing Somaliland as a state will bolster the security of the Eastern African region, because one is that there will be a Leviathan in Somaliland. Somebody, a system that can be held to account for anything that happens within Somaliland. As it is currently, there is no one that can be held to account by the international community of what takes place as far as security in that region is concerned.
Yes.
Secondly, once that one has been realized, it can now be used to be replicated elsewhere. Remember, there are some constant factors that are there in Somaliland that happens also to be in this other greater Somalia. Like, for instance, in Somaliland, you realize that it is a mixture of two things, religion and modernity. Maybe this is something that can also be transferred over to Somaliland. And that is something that this other greater Somalia can learn from Somaliland, that look, there is also modernity in Somaliland. There is also religious things in Somaliland,
yes,
which
Richard,
they can learn from that.
Yes, I think you've delivered your point. You're almost out of time. You have 30 seconds each. Let me begin with Yasin. this year's election, from your own point of view, do you think it's going to be a game changer for Somaliland? Very briefly.
Well, this is one of the most. This is going to be a historic election from my view, and we are going to see if Kulmiye candidate or the UAID party's candidate or the Wadani candidate is going to take the day. But it's going to be a close call.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be a close call. That is the final comment by Yasin Abdulhab. You have 30 seconds.
Basically, the Somaliland must renegotiate with Somalia itself, because recognizing Somaliland does not resolve the problem in Somalia today. But if the Somaliland fully engage the rest of Somalia, seek for the peaceful divorce, or another one is if they can have what you call conditions so that they can easily spread that peace and stability they have. The rest of Somalia is better for them rather than looking for the last for the last 7 years
yes.
to be an independent state. I think it's better. They are much better if they join with Somalia.
And from one united country. Well said, Abdulhab. Richard, your final comment?
I think what it's required for the international community to ask itself at this point in time is whether Somaliland has made it to the threshold that it's required for a nation to be considered as a state. Let them look at whether it has a boundary, it has a population, it has a standing army, and it has a population. If it has met the threshold that it's required, let the international move forward and recognize it as a state.
Well said, Richard. Many thanks for your input, as well as Abdulhab. And Yasin Juma was coming to us all the way from our city center studio. Not forgetting Sultan Mustafa, who gave us some detail there from Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa. Now, I believe we have to cross over to our images of the day. Anyway, let's take a look at our proverb of the day for now. And before we cross over to our final editorial tonight, let's take a look at our Twitter poll tonight, where we did ask you, do you think it's time the world accepted the semi-autonomous Somaliland as an independent state? 81% of you said yes, and just 19% of you said no. Allow me to sample a few feedback here. At Garissa Blogger says, despite being an Ogadenian, I support Somaliland's bid to be an independent nation. Why would they unite with a country that doesn't want peace? And one final comment here from Honorable Abdikadir, who says, Somalia has a lot to chew in terms of peace and stability and should not add more burden. Of course, keep the conversation going on. And it's about time we go to a final editorial and to the bottom line tonight. Most media houses, of course, don't call Somaliland a country. As a matter of fact, most of the international community don't recognize it as such, because officially it isn't one. Most of us call it self-declared republic, inviting criticism from many Somalilanders, as they call themselves now. But the territory has its own currency, passport, army and legal system. Its presidents come to power through fiercely fought elections, sometimes won with the narrowest of margins. Unlike many other African countries, the results are respected, even when the opposition wins. Somaliland is by no means perfect. Large parts of the east are disputed, sometimes violently, with other regions of Somalia. People in the west agitate for autonomy. There are even reports of sleeper cells of Islamist militia group Al-Shabaab. Some migrants who died in the Mediterranean are also from Somaliland, where youth unemployment is estimated at 75%. But those are challenges that continues to plague most African countries. So the independence, of course, is the glue that binds Somalilanders together. So the question is, Somalia better together, or Somalia has a right to self-determination? Let the jury decide. And that brings us to the end of the program tonight. Many thanks for watching. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Until tomorrow.